Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really try to sift through all the noise, the articles, the research, our notes, and pull out the absolute core nuggets of knowledge for you.
Yeah, it's like your shortcut to getting genuinely informed.
Exactly. And often you find those surprising little facts or insights that just, click.
Make things make sense.
Right. And today, we are embarking on a deep dive into something truly intriguing. I'd say maybe even a little provocative.
Definitely provocative.
Imagine for a moment you've been on that personal growth journey, right? Seeking deeper meaning, trying to unlock what you feel is your truest potential.
A familiar path for many.
But what if that path isn't just about mental exercises or, the usual self-help techniques? What if it's not even solely about spiritual practices as we normally think of them?
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, what if unlocking your deepest human potential is actually fundamentally, inextricably intertwined with your very biology, your physical self and your spirit, but all woven together, not separate things at all?
So breaking down those usual barriers between mind, body, spirit.
Precisely. That's the revolutionary premise we're exploring today. We're going to unpack the compelling and, sometimes challenging work of Shah Abdullah Bokhari, who's widely known as SAB.
SAB, right. And our sources paint a pretty interesting picture of him.
They do. He's described as the founder and CEO of Spiritual Conduit Healing. He's a spiritual conduit himself and a consultant specializing in healing and maybe notably exorcism.
That last one certainly catches the attention.
It does. And he's also the author of a book that really sets the stage for what we're talking about, Awakening Spirit, the Epigenetic Path to Exalted Consciousness.
Quite a title.
It is. And we're drawing heavily from his work for this deep dive, particularly a collection of his insights called Essay Wisdom Hike.
It's an exciting proposition, though, isn't it? Trying to bridge these worlds, spirituality and, hard biology. It really feels like a bold intellectual adventure. And our mission today, really, is to meticulously unpack one core quote from SAB's work. This quote is like our anchor, our map for the whole conversation. It guides us through his quite profound framework.
It's pretty dense, that quote.
It is dense, but incredibly fascinating because it throws together concepts we usually keep in totally separate buckets. Spirituality alongside terms that sound very scientific, like epigenetic intelligence and cognitive neurons.
Yeah, it really hints at this deep, maybe even radical connection between the unseen, the spiritual, and the tangible, the biological.
Exactly, and it points towards understanding our deepest nature, as he puts it.
Yeah.
Not just through thinking about it or believing something,
Right.
but through what he describes as a radical transformation of our very being. A transformation that's physical as much as it is spiritual.
Okay, let's bring up that quote then. It's the anchor for all of this. SAB writes, and I quote, "The awakening of spirit-born particles and the epigenetic intelligence inscribed within the luminous convergence of cognitive neurons toward exalted human consciousness is not merely essential, it is the sacred virtue through which humanity discovers its deepest nature."
Wow. Yeah, you can really feel the weight of that statement immediately, can't you?
You can. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also incredibly precise in its ambition,
Yeah.
And that first bit, that initial concept, it just jumps right out at you. Spirit-born particles.
It certainly does. I mean, spirit-born particles, that sounds, pretty far out there, doesn't it?
It's not standard terminology now.
You're definitely not going to find that in your standard biology textbook. It immediately signals we're kind of outside the conventional scientific box here.
Right off the bat.
My first thought is, what does he actually mean by that? Is this like a metaphor, a poetic way of describing something?
Or is it literal?
Exactly. Or is he talking about actual literal spiritual elements within us, maybe down at a subatomic level or something? That's the core question, isn't it? We need to get clear on that.
It's a crucial distinction, yeah. And it's one that SAB seems to address quite directly in his work. Now, while you couldn't measure these with, say, conventional scientific instruments or detect them in a lab like a chemical element.
Right.
SAB presents spirit-born particles, not as just metaphors. He seems to view them as actual, albeit maybe non-physical in the usual sense, foundational constituents of our being.
Okay, so foundational, like building blocks.
Kind of like the energetic signature of spirit, inherent within every atom, carrying a sort of blueprint for our highest potential. He really leans into the idea that these are literal, even if subtle. They represent the initial spiritual impulse that, in his view, gives rise to the physical.
Okay, so if our spirit isn't just something we have, like this separate soul inhabiting a body.
Or the ghost in the machine idea.
Right, exactly. But if it's something that literally forms us at the most fundamental level, maybe even within our atoms, what's the game-changing insight there? How does that shift how we view ourselves, our identity, our potential?
Well, the profound shift here is that SAB reframes spirituality. It's not an add-on, not just a belief system, not something that emerges from complex biology. Instead, he posits it as the foundational operating system of our very being. It's the intrinsic blueprint, the original design.
Like the code underneath everything.
Exactly. And this means your deepest spiritual potential isn't something you have to acquire or a destination you reach through external means. It's more like something you uncover and activate from within the very fabric of your physical self.
So it's already there.
He's saying our atoms, the very stuff we're made of, carry a spiritual code and inherent programming right from the moment they exist.
Wow. That's a pretty radical departure from a lot of conventional views, isn't it? It directly challenges philosophical materialism, the idea that everything is just matter and energy in the way we usually understand it.
Completely.
And it really takes on mind-body dualism, that classic idea, often linked to Descartes, that the mind or spirit is totally separate from the physical body.
Yeah, the whole separation thing.
SAB is asserting this profound, inextricable link. He's saying spirit isn't just an influence or some separate entity floating around.
Not the ghost in the machine.
No. Instead, he says spirit actually gives rise to the physical, or it is the foundation, the actual building blocks. It's embedded within our physical existence from birth.
Precisely. And this changes the whole game for self-discovery. It isn't about finding something new or external to yourself. It's more like uncovering or activating what's already there.
Like tuning into a signal.
Yeah, exactly. Like tuning into a frequency that's always been present, just maybe dormant or obscured somehow. It becomes an internal discovery.
And the body itself, then?
The physical body itself becomes sacred. It's like a living text carrying the spiritual code. If your very atoms carry a spiritual code, it radically changes how you perceive your identity. You shift from seeing yourself as purely material or having a separate spirit to seeing spirit as the inherent blueprint, the original design.
So does that suggest a sort of pre-programmed spiritual destiny? Or is it more like a deep spiritual potential coded into our biology from the ground up? What about free will in this picture?
That's a great question. SAB's framework seems to lean towards the latter. He doesn't really dismiss free will. It's more like he emphasizes that our choices determine whether we align with or deviate from this inherent spiritual blueprint.
Okay.
The blueprint represents our highest potential, that state of our deepest nature when it's fully actualized. Our life experiences, our environment, and crucially, our spiritual practices. These can either obscure that blueprint or help reveal it.
So it's not rigid like fate.
No, not a rigid destiny. It's more like a powerful inherent potential that's waiting to be realized through conscious effort and spiritual alignment. He seems to see it as the ultimate reality that can influence and guide our material expression.
That makes sense. And this idea of the body becoming sacred, a living text carrying this code, what are the practical implications? Does it change how we should think about physical health or self-care or even modern medicine from his perspective?
Oh, absolutely. If the body is a living text carrying the spiritual code, it shifts our whole relationship with our physical form.
Yeah.
It implies that true well-being isn't just about physical health in isolation.
It's got to be integrated.
Exactly. It's about aligning the body with its spiritual blueprint. So this could mean that chronic issues, for instance, might not just have physical or psychological roots. They might have deeply spiritual, maybe even epigenetic roots, in his view.
So treating the body needs to address the spiritual level first.
Ideally, from SAB's perspective, yeah. Treating the body would involve addressing the spiritual encoding. Self-care, then, isn't just diet and exercise, though those might be part of it. It's also about practices that harmonize your physical form with its intrinsic spiritual design, allowing that original blueprint to express itself optimally.
So seeing the body as a sacred vessel.
A direct manifestation of divine potential, yeah. Worthy of profound respect and conscious spiritual engagement.
Okay, it's fascinating how he sets that deep spiritual foundation, grounding our very atoms in spirit. But then almost immediately in that quote, he pivots. He connects it to something that sounds very biological, very tangible. Epigenetic intelligence inscribed within the luminous convergence of cognitive neurons.
Yeah, that's quite a mouthful.
It is, and it feels like quite a conceptual leap, doesn't it? How does he bridge that gap from spirit particles to neurons and epigenetics? He's really forcefully marrying these two worlds.
He certainly is.
Yeah.
And this is where his framework gets really, well, revolutionary, I suppose, because he's drawing a direct line between the spiritual and the biological.
Okay.
But before we dive into SAB's unique take, maybe let's quickly set a baseline. What does epigenetics mean in a conventional biological sense, just so we're clear?
Good idea. So in standard science, epigenetics basically refers to changes in how our genes are expressed, how they're used, without actually altering the underlying DNA sequence itself.
Right, so it's not changing the actual hardware, the DNA code itself.
No, it's more like changing the software, how those genes get read or used by the body, like flipping gene switches on or off, or maybe turning the volume up or down on certain genetic expressions.
That's a great analogy. And conventionally, these epigenetic changes can be influenced by, well, environmental factors, right? Our experiences, diet, stress, exposure to toxins.
Things have happened to us.
Yeah. And remarkably, some of these epigenetic changes can even be inherited. They can affect future generations without any change to the core DNA code. So that's the established biological concept.
Okay, so that's the standard understanding. Now, how does SAB take that idea of epigenetic intelligence and redefine it or expand on it? How does he inject the spiritual into that?
Right. This is where SAB makes his boldest move, really, in bridging these realms. He takes that established idea of environmental influence on gene expression, and he posits a spiritual version of it. For him, epigenetic intelligence refers to how our, let's say, spiritual environment, or maybe the intrinsic spiritual information held within those spirit-born particles we talked about.
Okay.
How that acts as a kind of master controller over our biology, affecting those gene switches. He suggests that spiritual information may be divinely guided, maybe inherent to our spiritual blueprint, acts like a sophisticated software update for our physical being.
Whoa. So the implication there is that something like, say, focused prayer or meditation or some specific spiritual practice could literally change how our genes are expressed.
That's what he seems to be suggesting.
It's acting like a direct software update for our biology, but triggered by spiritual input. That's truly profound, because it means the spiritual journey isn't just about feeling different internally or changing your mindset.
No, it's deeper.
It's about becoming biologically different, quite literally rewriting our biological destiny, potentially beyond just the genes we inherited. It's a direct physical transformation catalyzed by spiritual evolution.
Precisely. SAB's work suggests that highly focused spiritual energy, maybe through specific meditative states or profound intentions or particular invocations, acts like a vibrational key.
A key.
Yeah, this energy is believed to resonate with the inherent spiritual code in those spirit-born particles, effectively awakening them.
Okay, so the particles get activated.
Right. And once awakened, these particles, being foundational, then broadcast a new set of instructions like that spiritual software update to the epigenetic layer of our DNA. And specifically, he mentions this happening in the neurons.
Our cognitive neurons.
Exactly. Affecting our brains.
Right, okay. Cognitive neurons. These are the brain cells involved in thinking, perceiving, remembering all our higher mental functions.
Thinking cells.
And SAB is suggesting that our spiritual path, through this spiritual epigenetic influence, can literally change our brain structure and function.
Yeah.
Not just changing our minds in terms of beliefs, but changing the physical brain itself.
Yes, that's the profound assertion here, that these cognitive neurons actually undergo physical changes driven by spirit. The spiritual journey isn't just about gaining insight. It's about the brain actively rewiring and transforming itself to embody those spiritual insights.
Embody them. How?
Well, you can think of it like an antenna being fine-tuned.
Yeah.
The brain isn't just passively receiving signals. It's actively changing its structure to become a more effective receiver and maybe even transmitter of these higher spiritual frequencies.
So insights aren't just abstract ideas.
No, they lead to tangible changes in neural pathways, making the brain more adept at processing and integrating higher consciousness. It becomes physically different.
That makes the brain a very active participant in this spiritual transformation, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And what about that other phrase in the quote, the really poetic one, luminous convergence? What does that actually mean in SAB's framework?
It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? And adds another vital layer here. Luminous convergence seems to describe the meeting point, the critical juncture where spiritual insight merges with and profoundly impacts the brain's actual activity.
Okay, a meeting point. And luminous.
Well, the luminous part implies clarity, doesn't it? Profound understanding. like a light being switched on in your head.
Yeah.
But maybe more deeply, it suggests that the brain itself becomes illuminated, transformed by spiritual light, leading to this new synergistic relationship between mind and spirit, which is physically grounded in the neurons. It's the point where insight isn't just understood intellectually.
It becomes embodied.
Exactly. It becomes embodied.
So the convergence is this dynamic meeting place, and luminous suggests the quality of that state, this clarity, deep understanding, maybe a state where the brain's very processes are, I don't know, lit up, transformed, operating at a higher frequency.
That's a great way to put it. Sounds like an active integration, where spiritual knowing isn't separate from biological function anymore. They become functionally inseparable in reaching that higher consciousness he talks about.
Okay.
The brain, in this state of luminous convergence, becomes a true conduit, an interface for these higher states of awareness. It sort of redefines intelligence itself, moving beyond just processing information to a state where spiritual insight actually informs and transforms cognitive function. So this isn't just a mental state. It's a profound, integrated transformation where the spiritual literally shines through and elevates the biological, enabling higher capacities of perception and understanding.
It sounds like the moment of profound integration, maybe that aha moment where the spiritual blueprint fully activates the biological hardware, as you put it.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
The hardware gets an upgrade driven by the spirit.
Okay, so this is a biological transformation driven by spirit happening within our neurons, leading to this luminous convergence. It's certainly an ambitious and compelling idea. So if this awakening happens, this convergence, what's the ultimate destination? SAB says it leads toward exalted human consciousness. What does that peak state actually look like, according to his framework?
Exalted human consciousness. Yeah, it really sounds like the pinnacle, doesn't it? The ultimate destination of this whole process.
More than just feeling good, I assume.
Oh, much more. I imagine it implies a radical shift in how you perceive and interact with reality. For SAB, it seems to signify a fundamental and permanent shift in awareness, a profound level of understanding, and a deep, continuous state of spiritual connection.
Like a complete internal realignment.
Yeah, a complete internal realignment where you see reality differently, maybe with heightened intuition, operating from a place of deep peace and clarity, where your actions just flow effortlessly from your true self, you know.
And given S.A.'s background, you mentioned his work in healing, and as an exorcism consultant, that context feels incredibly important here. Does exalted consciousness also imply a state that's truly cleared of, well, spiritual issues or blockages?
Oh, it absolutely does. I think that's key. Given his unique expertise, exalted consciousness for SAB very much implies a state of profound spiritual purification.
Purification.
Yeah. It means being cleared of spiritual issues, blockages, or what he might identify as negative influences or perhaps lower vibrational energies that hinder your true potential.
Okay.
In this state, the ego's distortions, the noise, it's dissolved. And there's a complete alignment with something pure, something perhaps divine. It's a state of real clarity, sharp perception, where your actions and thoughts are no longer driven by fear or confusion or external pressures,
But
by an authentic, awakened inner core, your true self.
so it's about living out your deepest nature from that exalted state. What does that specifically mean in SA's context, then? Discovering your deepest nature.
Living out your deepest nature in this exalted state. Well, it signifies achieving perfect alignment. It means your thoughts, your actions, your feelings, your entire way of being are in complete harmony with that fundamental spiritual essence that he says is encoded in your spirit-born particles.
Back to the blueprint.
Back to the blueprint. It's a state of profound authenticity, spiritual power, and fully actualized potential, but within a physical form. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be, fundamentally, without all the filters, the noise, the distortions that typically obscure our true selves.
So it's less like self-improvement in the usual sense.
Much less. It's more like profound self-realization in a very deep spiritual sense, transcending limitations that, in his view, are fundamentally spiritual in origin. You are, in essence, vibrating correctly, expressing that divine design that was there all along.
And he doesn't just say this process is beneficial or even essential. He really elevates its importance by declaring it the sacred virtue. Why that specific phrasing, sacred virtue, that carries a whole different weight, a moral and spiritual imperative, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And this phrasing is incredibly key to understanding the gravity of SAB's message. For him, calling this awakening process a sacred virtue lifts the entire thing far beyond just self-help or personal growth.
It's not just about you feeling better.
No, exactly. It's not just about feeling better or achieving individual success. He frames it as a moral and spiritual imperative, a fundamental principle of existence that we should all strive for.
Like it's part of a bigger plan.
It's presented almost as part of a divine plan for humanity. Yeah. A cosmic design that we are meant to align with. It suggests that self-discovery, through this specific spiritual biological awakening he describes, isn't just a personal choice or a preference.
It's more like a duty.
It's a profound spiritual duty, almost a moral obligation for every single individual.
Wow. So he's saying this isn't just one path among many possible paths to fulfillment. He seems to present it as the path, maybe the only real way for humanity, collectively and individually, to find its core truth, its fundamental identity.
An identity that, for SAB, is inherently spiritual.
Right.
That's right. It's presented as the definitive path to genuine human actualization, fulfilling our ultimate purpose. And this implies a very specific moral framework where, well, ignoring this awakening isn't just a missed opportunity.
It's worse than that.
It's considered deviating from our intended path. That puts the stakes incredibly high, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests that until this awakening happens on a broader scale, humanity remains somehow incomplete, unable to fully manifest its true nature, and perhaps even inadvertently causing problems by being out of sync with its fundamental blueprint. It's a powerful call to action, really.
Very high stakes indeed. And that brings us nicely to the practical application of all this profound, complex philosophy. How does this theoretical framework with its spirit-born particles and epigenetic intelligence actually translate into SAB's practical work, as a spiritual conduit healer? How do these ideas meet the pavement, so to speak, in his workshops or healing protocols?
Right. This is precisely where his philosophy becomes actionable, where it moves from theory to practice. SAB's healing methods, particularly his prayer-based healing protocol workshop, are designed as the practical tools to actually trigger this awakening he's describing.
So it's not just about understanding the ideas.
No, it's about direct experiential transformation, a recalibration in your entire being. You'd attend a workshop not just to learn stuff intellectually, but ideally to undergo a fundamental personal change through direct participation.
Okay. And he describes this protocol as a non-invasive method developed by SAB for penetrating molecules at the cellular level by reflecting the impact of prayers to tranquilize spirit particles.
That sounds incredibly specific, almost technical.
It does, doesn't it?
How would focused prayer or specific intentions, like you mentioned, actually realign these particles or influence epigenetics at a cellular level, as he suggests? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It truly is. And SAB's approach implies that highly focused prayer, specific intentions or visualizations, the things taught within his workshops, act as a direct command or communication to that inherent spiritual programming we discussed earlier.
Okay, like sending a message?
Kind of like sending targeted spiritual data packets.
Right.
Or maybe you think of it like clearing static from a radio signal so the pure message comes through. The idea is that these foundational spirit-born particles respond to precise spiritual input.
And this input?
This input is believed to unlock dormant potential and retune the vibrational frequencies within those particles.
Okay, so conceptually, let me see if I've got this. The spirit-born particles are like the deep operating system of our being.
Yeah, the fundamental level.
And prayer, or focused spiritual intent, is like the code, the specific targeted spiritual code that rewrites that core spiritual software.
That's a good way to think about it.
And this spiritual software, once it's rewritten, then dictates how your biological hardware, specifically your cognitive neurons, function. Is that a fair analogy for how SAB might envision this mechanism?
I think that's a very insightful way to frame it, yeah. You could see the spirit-born particles as the fundamental energy architecture, the core blueprint, and the prayer protocol as the precise energetic instructions needed to activate it correctly.
And it's not just positive thinking.
No, within SAB's framework, this isn't just thinking nice thoughts. The focused intent and the energy generated through these specific invocations or visualizations, perhaps by focusing energy on divine light or universal love or specific sacred phrases, are believed to resonate directly with those spirit-born particles.
Like a key turning a lock.
Exactly. Like a key turning a lock, activating the spiritual information encoded within them.
And then that activation sends signals, these data packets, to the epigenetic mechanisms that control gene expression in our neurons.
Right.
So if a gene related to, say, anxiety or maybe spiritual disconnection was dimmed or blocked by some kind of spiritual discord, the prayer protocol would aim to flip that switch back on, or turn up the volume on the neural pathways related to peace, clarity, or that profound spiritual connection he talks about.
Theoretically, yes.
Mhm.
This spiritual input is believed to improve neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, enhance cognition, and clear what SAB refers to as spiritual static or blockages.
And the luminous convergence we talked about.
That becomes the experiential outcome, the feeling of profound clarity and heightened awareness that occurs because of these biological shifts.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the spiritual insights literally illuminate the mind, grounded in these newly recalibrated neural pathways.
So someone undergoing this protocol might report, I don't know, a sudden profound clarity, a deep knowing or intuition far beyond their normal capacity
Possibly.
because their internal spiritual circuitry has been optimized, essentially. And if someone felt spiritual disconnected or blocked, the protocol would aim to purify those spirit-born particles, recalibrate their frequency.
Leading to tangible improvements.
Right, leading to tangible improvements in their mental, emotional, maybe even physical state, according to him.
Exactly. SAB suggests that even deep-seated issues, whether they seem psychological or physical, might actually have a spiritual epigenetic root that can be addressed this way.
So it puts a lot of emphasis on the person's active role.
A very active role, yes, guided by his specific methods, of course. But the idea is you can actively participate in rewriting your spiritual story and through this process manifest a physically different, higher state of being. It's a comprehensive, quite hands-on approach to activating what he believes is an innate potential within every single individual.
So as we wrap up this deep dive then, SAB offers a truly unique, definitely boundary-pushing perspective.
Yeah.
He's positing that a spiritual awakening one deeply and, as he says, inextricably tied to our biology through these spirit-born particles, epigenetic intelligence, and the luminous convergence of cognitive neurons isn't just one path among many.
That's right. He posits it as the sacred way, the sacred virtue, leading ultimately to exalted human consciousness and the discovery of our deepest nature. It's a grand, comprehensive vision that profoundly intertwines spirit and biology in a way that, frankly, few other frameworks even attempt.
It really is. And considering SAB calls this awakening a sacred virtue, not just essential or beneficial,
Right.
well, it does leave you, the listener, with a pretty powerful question to ponder, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
What might that imply about your own inherent ability to transform, especially when he describes it happening through this luminous convergence of cognitive neurons? He's suggesting a direct, physical, conscious pathway is available to each of us.
Indeed. The idea that this profound journey isn't something out there, but is literally encoded within us, just waiting to be awakened. It's the possibility that the most sacred transformation you could ever seek might actually be accessible right there within your own biology and consciousness.
Activated how?
Activated, according to SAB, by a conscious shift in spiritual frequency, perhaps through methods like his.
A truly profound thought to mull over. Thank you for diving deep with us today.